podcast role. Welcome in.
You're listening to an Imperfect Leader, the Superintendent and Leadership Podcast, a proud member of the Podcast Roll Network. Hello, Jamie.
Hey, Peter.
What's going on?
What's up with you?
What is going on with me? I don't know. I mean, it's now spring, right? Oh, I'm going to have a 21-year-old like this week. That's crazy to me. And,
Are you going to do anything
I don't
special?
know. We're going to go out to dinner. I
Yeah.
did remind him that he might want to take his passport out with him since in the state, it's a vertical license says you're not of age. So I just said, be safe. I can't imagine a world without you. I'm sure, oh my God, you're being a bit dramatic. It seems so easy when your kids are little and then they get older. And it's just,
Yes, I
it
do.
becomes a bigger,
100%
bigger
100%
concern.
no.
Yeah.
Our eldest just got home from college for spring break. He came home. You came home? That's amazing. I'm so glad you're home. How many days will you stay with us? And he's like, I don't know.
Yeah. You already blew it. You're too excited.
Yeah,
Let me
exactly.
dial it back. Hey, what's going on? Dad
so
plays
like,
hard to get. What,
yeah,
I don't care. Whatever you
there's
want.
that whole bit with, I remember Tina Fey talking about saying like, it's kind of like you're dating. You're like, hey, what are you up to? Some of us are going to go out to eat. I don't know if you're probably not interested. Don't worry about it.
I don't know. With my kids, it's like, oh, you're paying? I'm there. Well, listen, I want to talk about Heather Naro.
Yeah.
Because I really enjoyed my conversation with her, and what an amazing opportunity really to begin as I'm beginning this new journey to work in Cartagena, Colombia. I've been reaching out to international heads and wanting to better understand their experiences, what to think about, what to look for. You'll hear her talk about the October slide, which was like really fascinating to me in terms of like what happens and sort of the getting a beat on a system and understanding at certain times of the year, certain things happen. And it reminded me of a book that I read. I was a bilingual teacher, and one of the things that really, I was always looking for ways to like, I don't know, maybe disrupt our natural flow about how we understand culture and how we understand the rhythms of our lives and maybe the dominant culture. And Sean Tan, he wrote a book called, I don't know if you can't see it on the screen, but it's called The Arrival. And there are no words. It's all illustrations. Are you familiar with the book?
It's ringing a bell, but it might be just because it makes me think of Van Allsburg, the Van Allsburg.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But go on.
And so it's called The Arrival, and it's a migrant story about he leaves his family. The city or like the village that he's leaving really reminds me of my own grandfather's experience of leaving the shtetls of the Ukraine because to have remained would have been certain death. And he eventually finds himself in this city that is like foreign customs, peculiar animals, these like objects that are floating, languages he doesn't understand. And it like immediately makes you just uncomfortable. You don't fully understand what's happening. And it is like totally how I imagine as Heather is going to talk about her experiences in working in multiple countries around the world and now in Alexandria, Egypt. Just that sort of, how do you help those who are coming to work with you, those that you serve? How do you create, we always talk about on our podcast, this cultural field. How do you create that cultural field where everyone is valued and honored? And anyway, it's super cool. And it really made me think about that. Like, how do you, I don't know, these themes of like hope and upheaval. And of course, she's in Egypt right now, for which a part of the world that is in total upheaval and incomprehensible violence. And yeah, anyway, that sort of was where my brain was as I started to think about our conversation today. I am curious about, as we go into the conversation, you having heard it, what are some things you want people to listen for, or some things that we might talk about on the other end?
I'm with you. That creating a common cultural field in a place where you actually don't know the culture is fascinating. That's fascinating, or it's not intuitive to you. So she mentions this concept of what she identifies as intercultural competence. I think we use the phrase cultural competence regularly, but in essence, it's the same. You're just talking about being in a different space. So instead of it being cultural identities that are different from American identity coming to the US and trying to better understand what their experience is like, this time you're going there. And so you learning that in order to create a common cultural field that includes everyone, including what she said was people who live there and work at the school, I think is riveting. I think it's totally riveting.
Yeah.
There is one comment about understanding oneself in order to better create that. you guys talk about this. This is the thing. This is the part of the conversation that really moved me, and that I believe that's always important. The better you understand yourself and your own beliefs and biases and where those might show up, where you have clear, oh, these are my values.
Right.
And that's why I'm feeling dissonance, is because the values are not aligned with whomever I'm with or wherever I am. The clearer you are about yours, the easier it is to understand the difference. The less clear you are about yours, you're just going to fight.
Well, and I wonder if you are comfortable talking about this, because the vast majority of our 2,000 monthly listeners they're listening. They don't see us. We get maybe 50 to 100 people who watch the YouTube video.
Yeah.
So nobody sees you. They hear your name, Jamie Almanzan. But I imagine you bring to this a really interesting perspective, being Mexican-American yourself and navigating dominant culture with primary culture. You live with your mom. That brings a whole nother dynamic. Or I should say your mom lives with you, because otherwise it sounds a little bit more pathetic. Lives in the basement with us. No, they cohabitate as one might expect in a generational home. So I don't know if I had a question, and I was really interested in your perspective on this, and I know we'll get into it.
I'm super excited to talk about it. It also connects a little bit to something that the work that I've been doing recently, and something old that came up again. And you realize maybe it's similar to the book you just shared, that a book came up. I was working in this one place and a book came up and I was like, oh, I remember using this and talking about this. And I haven't talked about it in a long time. We'll come back to it.
Okay, perfect. Truly, as we do each week, we talk about our guests, but we also share a little bit about our sponsor. And so I think about this like education is in the middle of a real shift. And really, as you'll hear Heather talk about, we're really thinking more about the individual needs of students. And so the goal is full inclusion. And that really does take intentional support and personalized learning. And so that's where our sponsor IXL comes in. They adapt in real time to each student's level. They help teachers meet every learner right where they are without adding more to their plate. And so we encourage you to join the districts already seeing real progress for every student. You can do that by heading to ixl.com/imperfect to learn more. All right, you're listening to An Imperfect Leader, the Superintendents and Leadership Podcast. I'm Peter Stiepelman.
And I'm Jamie Almanzan. And we'll see you on the other side.
Today on An Imperfect Leader, my guest is Dr. Heather Naro, a career international educator who began overseas in 1992 in Cairo, Egypt. And Dr. Naro has served as an administrator for many years. I mean, now serving as the head of school at Schutz American School in Alexandria, Egypt. Heather is a strong student advocate, believing that all students can be successful. I mean, I have been doing a little bit of a deep dive, probably when people are like, I Googled you. I did. And then have had such a great opportunity to just kind of learn more about you. And that really comes through, is that you really are a student advocate. So Heather, welcome to An Imperfect Leader.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today.
So I want you to, for a moment, just tell me why you have headphones on. I mean, you could have them on or not have them on, but just take us to what time it is right now in Alexandria, Egypt, and why it might be important for you to have them on, at least for the guests to be able to focus on you and maybe not the surrounding environment at the moment.
Yeah, we're approaching our evening call to prayer. So we have call to prayer 5 times a day. And so we're approaching the evening call to prayer, and it will get loud here very shortly. And I would prefer that I can listen and the guests can listen as well. So headphones are on.
Perfect. Okay. So that reminds me, when I was a school principal at an elementary school, I had the local imam's kid, and he would tell his teacher, I have to pray 5 times a day. And of course, we made that accommodation for him to do that. It always appeared that when math or writing time came, it was, I have to go. It's my time to pray. And so I had to call the imam and go, all right, let's talk about the times that you think that we can just be on a schedule, because it does appear that it's 5 times an hour that your son is praying. He was from New Jersey. I'm coming down there. I was like, all right, come on down. Let's talk about this. So anyhow, it is really nice to meet you. And I'm really grateful to Lori Ball of Senia International for introducing us to each other. I'm obviously thrilled, as you can hear, to meet you, and even more excited to add Egypt to my global listeners. Our international community is growing for sure, so that's exciting. But if I may, let's start with a sort of a retrospective of your career a little bit, because you started international teaching in 1992 in Cairo and have since lived all over the world. And so when you think about the changes that you've witnessed in international education, just what are some shifts that you've observed or experienced? And I mean, there are obvious ones with technology, but there are probably some other changes you've observed as well. So would you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, of course. For me, I think one of the biggest, starkest changes, and I'm going to give you some numbers to start with. So I started in 1992, and there were fewer than 1,000 international schools back in 1992. And the research right now for 2025 is there's 14,833 international schools. So you can imagine in the 33-year span, it's gone from less than 1,000 to over 14,000, almost 15,000 schools. It's a massive growth, and international schools have changed drastically in my time being overseas. But the biggest difference that I see is inclusion. So we started in 1992, and our school was exclusive, only for top tier students. If you had a learning disability, we didn't have a place for you. And for me, that was kind of heartbreaking because I'm thinking all these other children, they need to be educated. And you've got State Department families that come overseas. And where do they put their kids? There's nowhere to put their children. I have to say, and Lori gets a shout out here as well. Lori's organization, Senia, which I've been part of for many years, has helped bring that inclusion into all of our schools. So many of us now are very much inclusive. So I know my school, we have very neurodiverse learners at our school. Kids with autism, ADHD, physical disabilities. We can service them now, where 33 years ago, we just said no. And it's embarrassing to say that, but this was the reality of it back in 92.
I'm really curious about this. So I do some work with an organization called Be the Change Volunteers. They build schools around the world. And one of their shifts in their work has been about how do we become, or how can we support the local communities that are interested, and these are mostly public schools, in terms of being more inclusive. And so we do interviews with parents, and we do interviews with teachers and community members. And I guess I shouldn't be surprised, although it did startle me that there wasn't an expectation that the schools would provide any type of services. So in Papua New Guinea, for example, I interviewed teachers and I said, can you tell me about children who may come to school with exceptionalities, that anything from physical to intellectual disabilities? And they were like, oh, no, they stay at home. And parents also, and it's not our role, or at least I don't want to come across as a cultural imperialist or as a sort of forcing my own values on a community. It was interesting that there was an interest, but it was like, how would we do that? And so I'm kind of curious. It sounds like you had family in the international community, in the international schools, which typically are families with influence and affluence to some extent, who are going to ask for service, and you were not able to provide them in the past. And now you've started to shift. And I'm kind of curious, what were some of those first steps that you took?
Setting up the systems. I think with anything that we do is making sure that you have the systems. And as a school leader, I never felt comfortable accepting a child unless I knew I could support them. So you'll have some international schools that will say, I'm going to accept a child just because it's going to be a butt in a seat. And then that means tuition dollars. So I would never do that. I wanted to make sure we had those systems in place. So making sure what admissions look like and how severe you can accept a child, because that's also something that you need to consider. Do you have the abilities? At the school I'm at right now at Schutz, we are able to accept kids that are quite a bit below grade level functioning. Maybe you're in sixth grade and you're functioning at a first grade level, and that's fine. And we've got what we call a one-on-one assistant with them. So we train up our assistants to make sure that they can support the children, and we put those modifications in place so they're able to access the curriculum at their level. So they're growing. The parents are thrilled that they're part of a community. That's huge. I remember my last school, I was in Cote d'Ivoire, West Africa, and I still am good friends with this parent. And she came into me in my first week of the school. And she said, my child, he's autistic. He's got lots of issues. I don't know whether he's going to be able to be here. We tried to come to the school 5 years ago and they said no. And I said, let me try. And the kid is thriving to this day.
I love it. The best approach. Let's give it a try.
And we did it. We had a one-on-one. We had that one-on-one teacher with him. And that teacher has thrived. She has gone through so much training. She's learned herself and she's able to support the child. The child's now in middle school to this day. And I'm thrilled with the progress that they're making. But it was the parents willing to give it a try and willing to trust me that we were going to support them. And that the kid is doing things they never thought that he'd be able to do. And that's what warms my heart.
So I hear two things, and then I'll move to the next question, but two things in particular. One is, can we build the right system of support so a child can be successful? And then the second is something that I heard Daniel Sobel say, which was about how do we make sure that the individuals working closely with the child have the skills to be able to do it. And so it sounds like you're making those efforts and investments in the people so that they can serve this one child as well as all children. Because, I mean, what is good for one, often there's an ancillary benefit to others as well.
Yes.
So it sounds like you're
and
doing
we've been very purposeful here. We've got a director of student support, support services and teacher development. So that is her role. So she upskills maybe our local staff to make sure that they're able to support, but she also upskills our teachers because these students are in our classes. So we want to make sure they're in those classes as much as possible and getting the services that they need.
Then that's the third thing about not forcing kids to take a field trip to another place, but rather to be able to be fully included with their peers.
That's why we
good
want
for the
inclusion.
child and good for the peers. Yeah, absolutely. I did have a follow-up question, so I'll keep it brief, although I'm interested. Sometimes we refer to schools as lucky versus those that are really thriving, really are transformational, because the lucky schools are sometimes based on economics or socioeconomics or based on their zip code or based on the skills that they already bring in, that teachers are good and the kids do well. And then there are areas for which children can really excel because the teachers have gotten the skills to really bring that deep learning to the school. And so I was curious, just because your own doctoral work explored the sort of the characteristics of top-tiered international schools, and that really piqued my interest because I wanted to know, okay, so what are they doing? What sort of helps them stand apart today as compared to their peers to move from that sort of, we're lucky because kids they're going to do well, as opposed to thriving because they're really genuinely thriving. It's really intentional. What did your research yield?
So I think the two biggest pieces of my research, I came up with six characteristics of school quality. And it was the top two to me that resonate the most and that I use all the time as a school leader. So making sure that you've got a supportive school climate and a collaborative school culture. And it's creating that culture that makes the difference. I'll give you an example. When I was in Thailand, I was there for 12 years. When I was the principal, and then I became the superintendent of the school. And one of the things that I think we were very successful with, we created this culture. We created a culture where everybody felt supported, and there was this collaborative piece where everybody was working together. You didn't work in those silos. Back in 1992, we were working in silos. There were no more silos when I was in Thailand. And I think for me, the big piece was we had a retention rate for international teachers of 8 years. So on average, teachers stayed 8 years. That is huge for international schools. Teachers move every 2, 3, 5 years. They don't stay 8 years. It's very rare that does happen. And that was, I think, a tribute to us as a faculty, being able to create that culture that people wanted to stay. The other thing that we did is we had distinct professional development time. So we had a 1:00 dismissal every Wednesday. So we could use that time so everybody was working together on the same goals, working towards the mission of the school, and it made a tremendous difference. And I used to always say, because teachers in international schools, they want to move on. So we were always upskilling them. We were offering professional development, whether it was on math or literacy or whatever it was about. And we'd say, this is also going to benefit you because when you go off to your next interview, you're going to be able to say, you know what, I'm trained in whatever, literacy, and I can do Haggerty or whatever it was that you're doing. And that really made a big difference. I like to be able to try to get people to stay because you can really create that culture and keep those quality teachers at your school.
But it reminds me, I had a board member who said to me, I really didn't want to lose a couple of team members. They just had a strong cabinet and I was really reluctant to see them go. And I had a board member who said to me, do you know who Coach K is? And would say, Coach K's assistant coaches are now leading programs all across the country, and think about the influence and his legacy of doing that. And I think about this legacy of building a collaborative school culture where teachers understand what a professional learning community looks like, what it feels like, how to work together. And then after 8 years, they move on to another school potentially, and they get to influence this transformation in those places as well in terms of what it looks like to work collaboratively. That's a really cool legacy.
Yeah. And people have gone on to, and I'm in touch with many people living overseas. You're in touch with many of the people you've worked with over the course of your career, but they've gone on to do amazing things. Many have gone on to leadership roles, which I take that as a tribute to the school as well, because we were able to create those systems. And it was really exciting to see what we could do. I was talking to a friend of mine that I worked with at the school in Thailand and the other day, and we were saying we were really ahead of ourselves. Some of the things that we were doing back then were really ahead of the curve as to where schools were headed. We were really personalizing the learning. And that's a big term right now, is personalized learning, which we're trying to dig deep into that here at our school. But we were already starting that. And I'm talking, this was 2010. So 15 years ago, a long time ago.
You're right. You really were ahead of the game. And I imagine as people call response intervention or multi-tier systems of support, that you were already building systems to say, okay, so how do we make sure that everyone's getting a enriching environment, but also curriculum? And then if they're not making the kind of progress we would hope they would make, like how will we intervene appropriately based on this sort of personalized learning approach? So if you've been doing that for this long, that's pretty exciting, because that is really the push that people are making right now. Our guest today is Dr. Heather Naro, the head of school at Schutz American School in Alexandria, Egypt. And in the leadership model that I use to advise others, there's a dimension. It's called the leader's learning work. And inside that dimension, there's this term, systems thinking and design thinking. And you've talked about building the appropriate systems for kids. Heather, I had a chance to look at your website and also listen to an interview that you've done. And you talked about how successful schools find ways to systematize and sustain new practices. From your own experience, what are some ways to help a faculty not just adopt change, but truly own it and make it part of their culture of learning?
For me, it starts with my leadership style. So I'm very much a human-centric leader. I really put people first. And by putting people first and valuing them and looking at and taking care of their well-being, making sure that they're very much balanced, it gives teachers the autonomy to have that voice, that they can have a say in where we're headed. So I'm not one that says, okay, this is what we're going to do because this is what our senior leadership says. We're going to go down this pathway. But it's a collaborative effort of all the voices in the same room. And it's making sure that everybody does have a voice, even checking in with that teacher that's maybe a little bit quieter than the others and saying, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Because they might have a really good viewpoint, but they're just a little bit too shy to speak up and say something. So I do take the time to get to know the teachers. That's probably the first thing when I walk into a new position, getting to know those teachers and making sure that I take care of teachers. In the international school world, it's not just about you go to school and then you go home. Like right now, we all live together. So I've got a teacher living above me. I've got teachers living to the side of me. We're all living together on top of each other. And I have to take care of teachers' whole being. When they arrive, we make sure we pick them up at the airport. We do an IKEA trip. To make sure that they can furnish their apartments properly. We take care of all of the little nitty bitty pieces to make sure that we're holding their hands. We've got a huge American Thanksgiving that we do on campus with our faculty. We'll have the turkeys, we'll have all of the pumpkin pie, all of that. But it's celebrating those holidays together because we are far away from home. So for me in international education, being human-centric is probably the most important piece because you have to take care of your people. And when you take care of your people, they'll give back to you as well. When they know you care, then they'll go that extra mile for you when you ask for it.
You as a head of school, you are essentially a superintendent. And I'm curious about, so when you, and the turnover in superintendents, as we've discussed, is quite high. In many of the states that I've talked to, more than 40% are in their first or second year right now. And so they have, obviously they don't live with their principals and their teachers, although I think that there's a real similarity in terms of building that and leading with a human-centered approach of really getting to know your people. And I'm curious, do you do that through an empathy interview, an appreciative inquiry interview, or just what does that kind of look like? Do you mind unpacking that just a little bit for leaders who are thinking
I'm happy
about?
to. Yeah. So I have used the appreciative inquiry technique as a whole faculty, and that's been really good, especially as a new leader coming into a school. I really want to value and honor the traditions that have been in place for a really long time. So taking a look at it from an appreciative inquiry lens has been very successful. And I've done that a couple of times at the different schools I've been at. But I also, when the new teachers arrive, I have one-on-ones. So I make sure I sit down and have one-on-ones. Then we have the October slide. So I'm not sure if you know what the October slide is, but the October slide is very familiar in international school environments where you get there and it's really exciting and we take people out for dinner, we go to the beach, we do all these fun things, and then October hits and it's reality. Like, this is my life now. So I want to make sure that I check in with teachers around October, make sure that everything is okay, how they're coping. Things aren't overwhelming because they're learning. They're learning how to get around in a new city with a new language that they don't speak. So there's so many things to unpack, but making sure that you do check in with your teachers, especially your expat teachers, is very important. The other piece in international education that we often forget is the local staff. So local staff come in every day, and I've got local teachers, I've got local assistants, local administrative assistants, maintenance. They all come in every day and then they go. So do we check in with them? So it's really important to make sure that you're constantly taking care of them, because we put too much emphasis just on our expat staff. Yes, they're away from their families. Local staff have family here, but making sure that they're okay in the greater scheme of the school.
Yeah. And I imagine, I mean, we say there are leaders at every level. And so if you're human-centered or human-centric and you're making decisions together in terms of what do we want to create together, how are you intentional? It's not a question, but more rhetorical, but how are you intentional about making sure that those who are most impacted by decisions get to participate in that decision-making? And if you're so close right now in terms of you have teachers living there and teachers above you, and sometimes the natural conversation is about how things could be better and how do you take a step back and remember or remind yourself to make sure that you're including those who live off and are coming in daily. And yeah, that's really important. Thank you for reminding us. Yeah. I'd like to ask you a question that I ask of every guest who comes on the podcast. How does the term an imperfect leader resonate for you?
I think if you're not an imperfect leader, you're doing something wrong. So for me, imperfect leader means growth, and you're constantly on this learning journey. So there is no perfect. And if you're striving to be perfect, that doesn't exist. And I think we tell that to our children. We say you need to have this growth mindset, but we as leaders, we also need to have a growth mindset. And we will make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes. I'll never forget, I was head of school in Thailand, and the secondary principal, I made a terrible mistake. So the secondary principal,
You're not going to tell me what it was.
Money.
You're just like, I just made a mistake.
I will.
Okay. Okay. Sorry.
So I was making this mistake. So we were putting money, we're taking money from one pot and putting it into another pot. And the secondary principal looked at me and she goes, "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard." And I'm like, okay. And I had to take a step back and I had to think about it for a second. And I go, you know what? You're right. We should not be doing this. We should be doing it in a different way. And I think you need to have those thought partners as well around you. So you need to have people that are not frightened to say, "What are you thinking?"
Right.
Heather?
But you have built the relationship with that individual that she could say that to you in a way that would not come across as either offensive or like shocking, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry. So you have to be able to have people around you.
You have to have those people around you that can tell you, that can be honest and truthful and talk to you like a real person. And that's why I like to call them critical friends or thought partners, because we are, even though my role is head of school and I've got my senior leadership team, they need to know that they can come and say, "Hey, what are we doing with this? We didn't do a great job with that." That's okay. Because if we aren't honest with each other, we're not going to be able to move forward. So I think I love the term imperfect leader, because it means we're always growing. And I tell kids all the time, it's a learning journey. And when you graduate from school here, you're going to go on to somewhere else. You're going to go to university or college somewhere else. You're going to still be learning. But if you stop learning and if you stop growing as a leader, to me, it's time to get out of the profession.
Hey, district leaders, I know you already know this. In schools worldwide, cell phones are posing real challenges on student engagement and mental well-being. And I want you to meet Yonder, a proud sponsor of an imperfect leader. And let me share this story from a visit I made to some schools in Silicon Valley. I asked some kids what they liked about Yonder, and after some funny looks, they shared that actually, with Yonder, teachers don't have to battle with them over phones anymore. In fact, one kid said to me he didn't have to worry anymore about his parents texting him in class, and the kid next to him sort of shoved him and goes, "Texting? My mom used to FaceTime me in class." I want to introduce you to a support system that increases teaching and learning. I want you to discover why 1 million students choose Yonder daily. Minimize distractions, maximize learning potential. To learn more, go to overyonder.com. YONDR.
So I want to talk a minute about the Mosaic Project. It is one of our favorite organizations and has over 25 years of experience empowering students to really celebrate differences, communicate assertively, and resolve conflict peacefully at their outdoor school. I happen to have experience being part of the Mosaic Project, and so I can absolutely tell you it's an amazing organization. Their innovative SEL curriculum is now available to our Imperfect Leader audience. And so you can get a 10% discount through their new documentary film-based Mosaic Classroom project. So just let the people know during your onboarding process to receive that 10% discount is to just mention an Imperfect Leader. Learn more about the Mosaic Project at mosaicproject.org.
This is Greg Meyer, Jamie's partner at APC Leadership Collaborative. Superintendents know that school principals are the single biggest lever that any school district has for improving student joy and success. Unfortunately, there's very little professional development for the specific things that a principal has to do to improve their school. At APC Leadership Collaborative, we specialize in coaching principals to take on audacious goals, build their leadership skills, and make big improvements in their school. If that inspires you, let's connect and talk about how we can collaborate. Find APC Leadership Collaborative online at apccollab.com.
When leaders think in systems, they think differently. They see the big picture, making decisions that create coherence and strengthen communication across their teams. They build adaptability, flexibility, and engagement. Every day, school leaders face complex challenges, from student engagement to staff alignment. What if your team could see those challenges as part of a bigger picture? That's what happens when you think in systems. It's how leaders turn complexity into connection and challenges into opportunities for growth. At the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, we help educators and organizations build this capacity, developing the habits and tools that turn vision into action. Think differently, think in systems. Sign up for our webinars, free resources, or a consultation by visiting our website, which you can find in the show notes.
We're back for segment 2 of an Imperfect Leader called Imperfect Leadership in After Action. My guest today is Dr. Heather Naro, the head of school at Schutz American School in Alexandria, Egypt. And in this segment, we ask our guests to deconstruct a decision that they've made, and then I ask them, what did you learn, and things like that. Let's start with what happened. Heather, what happened?
Thinking of a difficult decision that I've gone through, one of the areas that I think for heads of schools or superintendents that we tend to neglect, and one of my peers who did my PhD in the same cohort as I did, worked on this, was head of school transition planning. We did not do a great job when I was transitioning out of Thailand as head of school and a new head of school was coming in. It was just horrible planning. It was not well planned at all. The transition went awful. And I still regret it to this day because as a result, multiple teachers left the year after I left. So they had this new head of school in their 1 year. And because nothing was planned out properly, multiple teachers that I had hired said, I'm done because this is not what I signed up for. And I think that's very common in international schools because you get new leaders that come in, they bring in new ideas and they change everything. And can be chaos, complete chaos.
Okay, this is a juicy topic because the same thing for new superintendents who in the US, just to put it in that context, they inherit a team, they bring in their ideas. That transition is typically not great either. And sometimes they're hired by a board who say, we want this, and everybody thinks they're moving in a different direction. But there's a lot of confusion, anxiety, frustration, false starts, all the kinds of things that are the absolute sort of antithesis to positive change or to transformation. And so when you're thinking back to your experience leaving Thailand and that transition, what would you say was overlooked?
I would say the whole having it written out. So I'm a big systems person. So having that system, what does it look like? Okay, so what does it look like even before we start to find a new replacement? How does that look? And then once somebody is hired, what does that look like? How often are you meeting? What are you sharing? What are the key important points to share with that person? And I think I was coming from a school that we had done a lot of work with assessment. I love talking about assessment, and we had gotten away from a lot of grades are the only important thing. We were looking at the whole child. And then my replacement was coming in and going, no, you have to have grades for everything that you do. And we weren't even talking to say, and I don't hire the new person. The outgoing head of school does not hire the new person.
Right.
So we already were not in the same frame of mind. So had we planned that better, maybe I could have educated the new person coming in. So it was done very poorly. So no systems were in place whatsoever.
Well, I'm thinking, okay, so systems thinking. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Waters Center for Systems Thinking, but they are an amazing organization. They did my facilitator training with them and the advanced training with them. And they have an amazing website. So I totally recommend checking it out because everything from habits of systems thinking to actually how do you build archetypes and how do you do stock and flow maps and how do you look at behavior over time? How do things change over time? And then be able to visualize that and say, so what was the difference here? Why did these things happen? It's amazing systems thinking work. And
it's Waters?
The Waters Center for Systems Thinking. I wrote a note to send you a link to them. They're just tremendous. And one of the things that they create are these habits of systems thinking cards, actually, and they're amazing. And one of the cards really speaks to the connections in terms of internal and external systems that exist within a school system or within any organization. I'm thinking through this transition that you're talking about. And one of the things that I also, or I'll just say not also, I failed to do well for my successor because when I left the superintendency, I didn't get to choose my successor. The board does. And I could have done a better job of making the connections of this person, who are the key thought leaders within the community, internally within the school and externally within the community. How are those people related to each other? And how, if you make this decision at the city level, how might the county respond to that? What are the unintended consequences of going, we had 4 high schools, of finally saying, yes, we're going to put a turf field at this high school without considering the 3 other high schools and all the kind of dynamics that exist. That was my sort of overlooked piece where I was like, oh God, I could have done a better job. And he was gone in 3 years and moved on to another position and seems to be doing well. So good for him. I always think to myself, what could I have done in that role? So as you're describing this for yourself, I'm like, oh, I'm reliving it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think a lot of schools are the same. I think that we really overlook how important it is to have a transition plan in place. And that needs to be rectified. We need to start right away. When you're hired, I should have a transition plan, even though I'm not planning on leaving anytime soon. I should have a transition plan already in place so that when I do plan on leaving, we go straight to that system of what that looks like. But we don't. I don't have that here.
What did you learn about relationships or what new relationships were formed?
So in this issue, in this school transition, I learned a lot. Some things about the relationships that I didn't think really existed. So I learned when I was transitioning with this person who was replacing me, a man, that he wasn't willing to listen. So I was trying to say, hey, this is where we are. But I'm going to come in and do it my way. So I'm like, okay, you come and do it your way. But in the meantime, I had been there 12 years. So I'd been there a long time. And I had hired almost every person in the school at that point. And I, at the end of the day, the first year I had left, felt extremely guilty because everybody wanted to leave because it was not what they had signed on for. So the relationships that I had built over those 12 years with those other people were much stronger than I even imagined. But they really respected what we were doing and where the school was headed. And then somebody else came in and wanted to change that. And that was not what they had signed up for. So I think everybody that I had hired left in that second year.
That's amazing. So, I mean, is it fair to say, so one of the things that you learned about relationships is that, I mean, you really have to cultivate them. You really have to build and 100%. Curate and then and keep feeding, nurturing them.
Yeah, nurturing the relationship. Yeah.
This individual comes in and says, you know, I'm going to lead by decree. And those are my words, not yours. You didn't say that. That's just my impression. Yeah. Or I didn't take the time to meet and get to know the people. And so, so they left.
Or the culture of the school. And when you go into a new school, you've got to understand that culture. And not only do you have to understand the culture of the school, you have to understand the culture of the country. And that's something that is often forgotten in international schools. You're going from country to country, and every country has a different culture. So if you don't understand that culture, you could be setting yourself up for failure.
It's just as a sidebar. So, I mean, so you had been in Egypt at one point, then I know that you were in Thailand, and then you've come back to Egypt. So you understand Egyptian culture what were some of the things that you did when you shifted towards, and please correct how I say Ivory Coast, because I know it's more appropriate to say Côte
d'Ivoire.
Côte d'Ivoire. So what were some of the things that you did when you moved to Côte d'Ivoire in terms of getting to know the norms and the culture and traditions and what's appropriate? And then what did you do when you moved to Thailand? And I'm really curious.
Yeah. one of the areas that I studied when I was doing my doctorate was intercultural competence. There's lots that you can research. There's even an app. So there's an app called Hofstadter's, it's with Hofstad. I can't remember the exact name of it, and you can compare countries. So there's different domains that you're looking at, and you can see how that compares with your home country. So being from Canada or the US, compare it to where you are in Cote d'Ivoire, where you are in Thailand or Egypt or wherever it is. The other thing that because I am very big into this cultural competence and
Yes.
the continuum. So you can start out here, you're a minimalist, and you can right here, and I've forgotten the word now, but you assimilate right into that culture. So there's a big spectrum. And one of the things that I did in Cote d'Ivoire, I have not had a chance to do it here yet, is I took our senior leadership team and we did the IDI, the Intercultural Competence Inventory. And it was very interesting for all of us to sit down and see where we are on that. Because I really believe that once you know who you are with respect to intercultural competence, it makes it a lot easier to understand other people.
Sure. I mean, we do this with our own equity work in terms of understanding how you have been socialized, to understand how you see the world as you take these steps on this ladder of, okay, so these are the things that I notice around me because of how the values and the beliefs and the principles that I lead with. And so it's because I notice those things, I make decisions or assumptions, or I assign value and those types of things. So I'm really excited to learn more about that. I was a bilingual teacher when I first started in Oakland, and it was interesting as new teachers would come in. And then when I was superintendent in a district with 75 different languages, many children who were refugees who had come to the US. And so we would have to do a lot of work around, hey, look, this child may not make eye contact with you because culturally it would be inappropriate, right?
Exactly.
And you'd find a teacher in a hallway going, look at me, I'm talking to you, look at me. And you're like, no.
And
it's deference. They would never in a million years look at you, right? Yeah.
And it's also making sure that when I bring in new teachers to whatever country I'm in, that we spend time on this. Because I remember my first time in Egypt, that nobody talks about this. And I was young, I was 24, and nobody talks about any of this. And so now it is a big piece of the onboarding of our new teachers, making sure that we spend time when they first get here to talk about that cultural competence piece.
What would you say frustrated you? And sometimes it's different from what got overlooked. What got overlooked is a systems what got overlooked. So didn't have a clear plan in terms of that transition plan. What frustrated you personally?
I think what frustrated me, I'm a very progressive educator. I don't believe that the education, the academic piece is the end all and be all. I do believe that we're educating whole children, and we need to make sure that we've got our kids set up for success beyond school, beyond K-12 education. So I think what frustrated me the most whenever I did meet with my successor, he had a completely different viewpoint from me. And so us having even conversations that were, and I tell you, I had a conversation here recently with somebody that's very old school. And I get frustrated with those kind of pieces because I'm like, but it's not like when I was educated. It's not back in the 80s. That's not where we're at right now. We're at a different place in education. And I always say this, not that I want little kids anymore. My kids are big, but I'd love to have kids right now in school, because what's happening in schools is amazing right now. We are making sure that we're meeting the needs of all of our learners. And I think that's truly exciting.
Yeah.
And I didn't see eye to eye with my successor.
Sounds like that was frustrating. And is it fair to say you had just dedicated 12 years to building something really special there? And
so
here
you get
was
frustrated,
somebody coming. Yeah. I mean, there are probably some other words, but we'll leave with frustrated.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that.
Yeah. In the end, though, as you think about this experience, so obviously that was not great in terms of transition, but as you think about that experience, what is something that is good that came out of it? Or as you have now subsequently made decisions and things like that, what would you say you learned from that?
Oh, I learned a lot from that. I learned it goes back, and because I really feel I didn't also make the effort to create that relationship. So it goes back to that relationship building. I was listening to him, but I was like, how could you be like this? So I was very narrow-minded as well. So I didn't do a great job with that. And I was giving up my baby. I mean, it was time to move on.
Right.
We knew we were moving on. Both our kids were out of school at this point, and it was time. We didn't come overseas to work at one school. 12 years was a long time. We loved it. But I think for me, that was probably the biggest piece, is the going back and thinking of the relationships that I build with everybody and creating that trust. Because as a leader, if the people that you work with don't trust you, you're not going to get very far. You're not going to be able to implement new programs. You're not going to be able to bring in new ideas. And so creating those relationships with people, I have spent way more time on that ever since I left Thailand. But remember as well, I was there 12 years. So creating those relationships became quite easy. My other schools since then, I've not been been at schools that long. So it's always been, I'm going to make an effort to create those relationships, work with people. And now we have friends all over that I can reach out to. And here's an example. Just yesterday, I just reached out to a friend. I said, I'm having a problem with this. Just reach out from somebody I've worked with another school, and they're on the phone, on Zoom, and you're able to get another thought partner that's not in your school.
A great example of things that sort of, because of these experiences, you build this network, you build this support. I love it. Our guest today was Dr. Heather Naro, the head of school at Schutz American School in Alexandria, Egypt. And just three things that come to mind immediately. One, in terms of our conversation, my takeaway is obviously the work that in international schools, and I believe in all schools, particularly because my expertise and experience has been in the US, is really that cultural competence, because our kids all come to school and the adults in those buildings all come in cross that threshold with different experiences, understanding of how they see the world. Doing and really taking that time to build that cultural competence work is super important. And that is done when you're building those true relationships with people and also fostering this collaborative and both congenial and collegial environment. And I guess the last thing is just the fact that you, from 1992 and continuing to today, doing this personalized learning for children, was ahead of the game then, is now, should be, and is absolutely what we're all striving for. We all know better, so we should do better kind of thing. And it just has been such really a real joy to meet you and to learn about all the great work you're doing.
Likewise, it's been a great to meet you, and hopefully we can continue this friendship that has started today.
I am counting on it. Okay, we are back. Welcome back. Thanks everybody for giving a listen to our conversation with Heather Naro. And Jamie, some initial thoughts.
Yes. On the front end, we talked about this concept of intercultural competence. And first, why don't we just start with, what does that mean to you? You're well-traveled. You've worked in schools outside of the U.S. as well as led whole districts in the U.S. Yeah. What does the phrase intercultural competence mean to you?
Gosh, one of the things that I constantly go back to in terms of the systems thinking work is, and this is something that you said right before we went into the conversation around beliefs, principles, and values. And so it's one thing in knowing yours and then holding that as a space and then really intentionally being curious and intentional about welcoming or opening to the values, beliefs, and principles of others and where they come from. And so when I think of systems thinking work, and I've talked about this in other episodes around the iceberg model, and like you see one's actions and you have to then go below the water to understand the patterns of behavior that may have influenced that action. You have to understand how the system was designed, right? Because this idea that a system structure will generate its behaviors. And then more than anything is to go at that bottom, that base of the iceberg, is to better understand one's own values, principles, and beliefs. And so this intercultural understanding is like this ability and willingness to attach and stitch yourself to the beliefs and values and principles of others without judgment, without adding some sort of hierarchy of superiority of, and that's very hard, I think, for North Americans, because they have this sense of what is right. And then I'll tolerate. I've really had a hard time with, like, in Los Angeles, they have the Museum of Tolerance. And I'm like, oh my God, if you go to this Museum of Tolerance, some of the most amazing exhibits and speakers and things like that. And I'm always like, why do we call it tolerance? Why is it not acceptance? It should be the Museum of Acceptance. Like, we all accept, and not just I tolerate your point of view or perspective. I accept it.
It's funny, as I get old, I had the same response. I've been to Museum of Tolerance a bunch of times, and it's amazing. And those people that have, they're completely free. So if you get to LA and you want to go, they'll set up a whole tour for your group, for your school. It's all free. It's amazing. As I get older, both of us are long-term public educators. I slowly but surely find myself saying, I think I'm okay with tolerance. Because
that's interesting. You're like, you know what? I would love acceptance, but if we could start with tolerance, I'll take it.
Yeah,
You don't have to
I-
agree with me or even like me or accept me. What I'd like
No.
is to not be afraid of living a day without fear of violence or
Correct.
emotional or physical.
Correct.
violence.
I'd like
Yeah.
to make sure that my children are safe, just like you.
Yeah. Wow.
And
Okay.
you don't have to believe what I believe. That's fine.
Yeah. So I answered, and I'm curious. You do this work all over the country,
Yes.
and I'm curious how you approach that question.
I think that I am definitely biased in that I grew up in a intercultural home. So I grew up because in some ways too, I think I'm even somewhat unique. And some listeners have heard this story a zillion times that I was raised by my grandparents who were first generation. But I think that's also amusing to me that they're considered first generation immigrant. I think it matters because my mother was busy raising and taking care of my sister, that my grandparents played a huge role in raising me. The generation of the cultural bridge is really my mother's generation, where she wrestled with some of the evolution of racial terminology in understanding who she was as a Mexican American person growing up in Los Angeles, not growing up in regularly connected to Mexico. They went for sure, but not most of the family by that point had moved to Los Angeles. So we were US based. I'm the generation after that. So ways that shows up for me is that I spoke English first, Spanish second. Everybody before me is the opposite. But because I was raised with Spanish speakers first and English speakers second, some of the viewpoints or cultural belief systems that my grandparents
When they're
held.
translated, the bridge was through their first language. Yeah.
So I have more in common value-wise with my uncles, with my mom, than I do often with my generation, merely based on the fact that I was raised by these two people. And so I find myself understanding cultural disconnect, understanding what it means to shift for your brain to change back and forth. What often described as code switching, or I could do that easily. I don't have a problem with that. It all resonated for me because we were doing this work in Oregon recently, and Cisneros' novel, Caramelo, was we were in a library and it was on a shelf. And I was like, oh,
It's great. It's great.
I love it. There's a chapter, one of the chapters in Caramelo I used to use all the time to describe intercultural competence, shifting. And it's where they describe what happens, she describes as she's driving from Chicago back to Mexico over the border. And she describes the sounds and tastes of things that are different. Just that, not necessarily even values. She's saying things like in the US, light switches say click, but in Mexico, they say talk. And I'm like, I know what she means. I know why the switch is just different. So it makes it louder, like talk sound. It's not click. She talks about the sweets of the paletas that you get, the popsicles that you get in Mexico. It tastes sweeter, different than it does in the US. And I don't think people understand like that when you do that, you start knowing, oh yeah, that now we're going to eat this, or now it's going to be that. And Heather's doing it in Thailand, Cote d'Ivoire, then Egypt.
That's right. I want to direct us to exactly what she's talking about, because she says like you can better support your staff and students who bring different values and norms and traditions to schools, right? And so I think her exact quote is, you have to really know yourself. And she says, I really believe that once you know who you are with respect to intercultural competence, it makes it a lot easier to understand other people. And what a toolbox that she has.
Can I add to that quote?
Please.
She says, when you know your own values, how your own values shape your perspective, you're better equipped to navigate differences and lead effectively.
Yeah, we probably should have just led with that, because you asked me the question and I'm like, you got the iceberg and then at the bottom you got the, you're like, hey, Heather really succinctly says it.
He
like,
said
hey, knucklehead, this is how you do it.
So amazing. It's like, I'm confident in mine. I don't feel ego driven in mine. I don't blindly apply mine. It makes room for others.
So I want to extend that a moment to another topic that she talked about, if that's all right, because
Sure.
think about this intercultural understanding. And there is in the United States, I mean, at least for the last 40 years, a real push towards inclusion, like true inclusion,
Yes.
instead of removing children from the classroom, taking them to a different place to do therapies, and then they come back just for parts of the day. And I mean, that is a really pull-out model. And in a fully inclusive model would say, look, a teacher who is trained is within the classroom alongside a general education teacher. So the specialist is there with the general ed teacher, and other kids get the benefit. I think I refer to as the ancillary benefit of having both teachers, particularly a specialist, to help kids who may be struggling. And so she talked about that international schools in particular have changed drastically in the time that she's been overseas, and that the biggest difference that she has seen in this area of inclusion. And I don't know what my question is other than to affirm some of the things that she talked about. And I mentioned it in the conversation about being in Papua New Guinea and being in Peru. I have observed it in Japan, where that's not necessarily the first thought of a school district. Their issues around resource allocation, around meeting the needs of kids, is really dedicated towards the children who are, I guess, in their minds, like progressing. And so I'm curious, just what were your takeaways as you were hearing that? Like this whole idea of like now really dedicating towards neurodiverse learners, students with autism, ADHD, physical disability, all those kinds of things. And
I have a specific question for you as a superintendent, but which I think is helpful for superintendents who are listening that I'd love for you to reflect on. But my initial response is your reflection on international places who struggled to do that should be caveated, in my opinion, with American schools being bad at it generally.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, the resources that are available are superior in the sense of not better, just in terms of there are more resources within the U.S. North American schools than are available in a rural community in the Peruvian Amazon. And so they're like, we're going to focus on this. And yet when you begin to interview teachers and parents, and you get to meet children, it's almost the whole idea of know better, do better. Wait, we could totally do something. Why wouldn't we include? Of course I want my child to be in school. I just didn't think it was possible. And so part of it is upskilling and training. Part of it is the structure of the school, making things work for kids. And I agree with you that having been a superintendent, and oftentimes the approach is thinking that you're doing the right thing for children without maybe sometimes circling back and really going through like a cycle of inquiry of saying, we're not just going to wait 1 year for the annual IEP or 3 years for the full evaluation. We're going to regularly kind of check in and be like, are things going as we had hoped?
I would hope that's happening. My experience is in places where we have worked in public schools, where we have worked to integrate kids with special needs with lots of different kinds of neurodivergence specifically. Most places are not upskilled. They are not prepared. Their mindset is old and traditional in that those kids need to be pulled out and put over there. They're disruptive to the kids, other kids that are in the class. All that kind of language is still alive and well. It's not universal. There are schools that are doing better jobs of that. My question, so as a parent of a kid who's neurodivergent, I saw it firsthand. You knew very well that actually in the public systems here in the Bay, they weren't going to be able to serve him. It just wasn't going to be good. It wasn't ever going to work. So I took care of that, right? I basically, as a parent, you start to figure out, okay, what am I going to do that's going to make the biggest difference for him? And my question is, how do you shift that kind of culture? How do you, from the superintendent's point of view, like, yes, there's a system. I understand the resource allocation and the system structure change. Is it that? Is that what causes it? How do I get people on the ground to understand because I'll tell you what, my son and his little friends, 7-year-old friends, when I tell them, when his friends go, how come your brother doesn't use words, doesn't talk? Leo says, oh, he talks. He just uses his body to talk, which is true. That's how Pablo communicates. Every 7-year-old's, oh, okay.
And then they become an adult who says, of course, they're not afraid.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
So to answer your question, I think it actually starts with the kind of training that teachers get, which is so inadequate. So when you're going through your teacher training program, they spend very little time unless your specialty is in special education. And so you get maybe 1 or 2 classes and that's about it. And they typically are just telling you the legal like requirements. If a child has an IEP, you need to know the IEP and you need to deliver on the accommodations that are a part of it. Teaching and incorporating, and let's use the word that I used during the conversation, nurturing a real relationship for a child with his peers, a child with their teacher, the family as a whole. I mean, there's nothing more gratifying than that community coming together. How come that child doesn't use words? I don't know. He speaks. It looks different, right?
Yeah.
So I would say part of it is the inadequacy in terms of teaching teachers how to truly be an inclusive classroom. And then I think once you get into classrooms and you get into schools, they have a very traditional model. And so they don't invest in or express any interest in that co-teaching model. That co-teaching model is so powerful. And so it becomes even less of a burden for the teacher now to have a second adult, right? I don't mean burden that the child who has special needs is the burden. It's the burden of having 30 kids in the classroom. Now you got 2 teachers. So now you can split up 2 groups of 15. You have a small group of kids who are working. Now you got a group of 5. Right. That's what I mean by the burden of just being a teacher. You now have another amazing adult in the room who will do some planning with you, co-teaching with you, not just to be an assistant for that one child. So I would say it is, like I indicated at the beginning, like the system structure generates its behavior. And unless you're willing to change the structure, you're going to always get the same kind of behaviors. So there is a lot to do in terms of to get better around mindset around children and developing with parents the very best program for their child.
So we turn the corner to the last of this conversation, I do want to say that even this part of the conversation around personalized learning, thinking about how the system and the identity of the teacher or the way in which the teacher approaches the classroom would change in order to better meet the needs of every kind of kid, every kid that's in there, including kids that are neurodivergent, amongst other. I mean, then you can make the case for potentially dismantling the gifted program because you knew that there would be additional adults in the classroom to push kids further, as well as not use an arbitrary assessment that declares that a child is gifted based on an IQ test. The giftedness is, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation we can have. And yet so much money is invested in gifted because you're worried about losing the influence and the affluence that comes often with gifted children, because IQ is often a marker of your socioeconomic status. I mean, come on. Yeah, exactly. I would say that the connection I wanted to make was to the earlier conversation that intercultural identity is also connected here, in that Pablo operates in a way that is outside of the cultural norm of the U.S. And
Pablo,
so
your son.
Yes, my son. I work as a translator for Pablo to others, but I don't have a problem translating. Why? I live with him. He's my son. Of course, I have to. I don't have a choice. It's who I need to love him. But there is intercultural identity, constant sort of navigating when you are going to go to this level of inclusion. You're now trying to figure out what is out of the norm. Am I comfortable enough with my own values in order to make room for others?
I love that, because as I enter into this new stage of my life, returning to day-to-day administration, leadership in a school, that is definitely going to require me to check my traditional thinking in some cases of how we did things and really embrace a different way of making sure that we're finding ways to include all children and to take the time to learn their nonverbals and that language when their parent isn't there. In loco parentis, right? We ought to be taking the time. And then, so how do I make sure that I provide that time for teachers to do that? So does it mean I enter the classroom and I teach while the classroom teacher is spending additional time getting to really know the child in their classroom? Because I'll leave. I know the answer is yes. I will be the one who leaves ultimately. So how do I help create without overburdening? And again, not that the child is the burden, just the number of responsibilities that you have can feel overwhelming. So how do I provide the structure and the support so they can do that?
This leads to the last comment, and that is that what you just described, all of that detail about, yes, I will be the one that holds the class so that you can develop the relationship with the kid, because actually it's more important that you develop the relationship with the kid as opposed to sending that kid out with a specialist
Yeah. Or to me, when the child has an outburst and you decide,
Yeah,
you know what, we
even more.
gotta learn. We've got learning to do, and go see
Even more.
Steepleman.
To me, that is human-centered leadership.
Oh, I love it. Oh, I love how you came around to that. Is exactly what I was hoping we would end with. Is that Heather spoke so clearly and personally around the importance of human-centered leadership, and that it's the foundation of a school's culture and a community's ability to work together and just see people as whole beings. And I did write a quote down.
Yeah.
She said, for me, in international education, being human-centric is probably the most important piece, because you have to take care of your people. When you take care of your people, they'll give back to you as well.
Yeah. They invest more. They
Yeah.
collaborate.
And I don't just mean the
They may go
adults.
further.
I don't think
Yeah.
she even means just the adults either. I mean, everybody will give
Right.
back. Yeah. Value and honor the people in your sphere. Yeah.
Exactly.
Great lesson for us all, I think.
Wonderful.
Particularly those who are in leadership all around the world. So
It was super wonderful to hear from her. I really enjoyed it. I did have a few times where I said, I wish Peter would have asked. As someone who's not in an international school, I'm like, how does that work?
Well,
Heather,
give me some
if
of
you
the
someone to
offline
visit,
if you want, because this episode is going to be shared with international heads all over the world. And there's something pretty special about the organization, the Academy for International School Heads. You can find them at www.academyish.org. And I really appreciate that, because each week questions come in from different heads of school that it is clear that they've created a really nice community where people, leaders, feel very comfortable to be vulnerable and to ask questions and to learn from each other. So this is going to be one of those pieces that becomes part of the repository of support.
Love it.
And these individuals can also expect that I'm going to reach out to them to have some conversations in the coming year, because I think this would be a really great way to think about how we do an imperfect leader while I start living abroad.
I love it. Thank you to Heather for being a part of this. And I look forward to the next international leader that we get to talk to.
I think so too. Thanks, Jamie. See you next
Yeah.
week.
See you next week.